Okay. Are you making any progress?
It's very early days, but yes, I would say yes.
Good. Good. Do you know the background of why the sexual revolution kind of pushed women towards acting more like men?
It's an interesting question. I think it's probably partly got to do with the women who formed the second wave. I think that the feminist culture of the 1970s, which was really focused in places like Greenwich Village in New York and a handful of other urban centers, and the women who wrote the most important texts of the second wave and went on to found organizations like Now, tended to be super well educated, super intelligent, super disagreeable, particularly
Ah,
disinclined towards things like family life. You know, the whole from their point of view, they were really spurred on by a desire to reject the traditional feminine role. And
So what the girl, or what this lady is saying is that womanism at its inception, right? I mean, she's talking about second wave, but even the first wave was highly intellectual women who spurned their role as traditional women and wanted to be more masculine. So literally the from the inception the point was to destroy that idea of women needing to be feminine because those particular girls that created it didn't want to be feminine themselves. So it's like, don't be like traditional women, be like us. We are strong and independent. We are la la la. I think that's probably accurate.
and often did so in quite spectacular ways, you know, on a personal level. Some of the biographies of second wavers are really unusual, really interesting. And so they obviously had preferences that are different from average female preferences.
Exactly. I think that's a very key and important point. What the girls that created the bedroom fun revolution didn't realize, although the bedroom fun revolution was actually caused by the birth control pill, but anyway. But this is the meme or the cultural idea that was allowed to take root as a result of the easier access to a safer, less risky bedroom fun for women. What they don't realize is that their message to the average woman would destroy the average woman's life progression, because the average woman's inclination is not towards enjoying being masculine. So they literally caused misery for millions of women by this very small thing. Well, it's not a small thing. They wanted the revolution to happen, but like its result was gigantically negative because of this idea, this solipsistic idea that all women would want what the creators of the womanist movement wanted.
Which isn't to say that everything that they campaigned for was kind of misaligned with what is good for most women. You know, things like setting up domestic violence shelters or setting up rape crisis centers. My first job working out of university was working in a rape crisis center.
Okay. Anyway, hello and welcome to the Helios blog. My name is Helios, here for another reaction video. If you're new to the channel, liking the content, hit the sub, hit all for notifications. If you'd like to support me, I do have a Patreon exclusive content, patreon.com/theheliosblog, newly revamped. So just go there and subscribe, patreon.com/theheliosblog. You can also drop me a donation like Tom M here, shoutouts to him. Link is in the description. Let's continue.
Those are the kind of institutions formed
ooh,
from the second wave, which are, you know, like really good. I don't think anyone, I think
No one doubts the efficacy or the goodness of those things, but the destruction of the happiness of the common woman, because these ideas are deeply planted in our cultural makeup now, that I think is a gigantic and negative consequence of womanism for sure.
very few, even anti-feminists, would argue against the establishment of those kind of institutions. But I think they were also just generally geared towards aspiring to a more masculine way of living,
Indeed.
just on the basis of self-selection and
Right, and more than this, the independence that womanism advocates for is independence from what? Independence from men. But here's the thing. When women are independent of men, what happens? The men walk away from relationships because the relationship are all downside negative, because they've been shifted, right? Marriage has been shifted to be all positive for women and all downside risk for men, just because of the way the laws work in 2023. And the happiness of women has suffered as a result, because what women want is far less attainable, because women aren't traditional anymore as a result of these deeply ingrained ideas that have been perpetuated for the past 60 years.
And personality than are most women. That would be my guess as to why the priorities kind of tended in that direction.
That's interesting. That totally makes sense too. A bunch of disagreeable, extremely smart women
Sadly, Mikhaila is one of them.
pushed society in a direction that doesn't represent the average woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Although I'd also say that I think that the feminist thinking has been important and has shaped our recent history in all sorts of important ways. But
Indeed, it has. Not necessarily for the better in most aspects, but it has, and that's undeniable.
It all comes secondary to material changes. All of it, you know. I think it was Phyllis Schlafly who first said that the washing machine did more to liberate women than did feminist campaigning.
Absolutely. Washing machine, birth control pill, the vacuum, yeah, of course. Of course. That's without a doubt.
I think this is evidently true, right? And there are so many ways in which our lives have dramatically changed within the last 100 years, not just the washing machine, but the pill, which is really forms the center of my book. The fact that we now are orientated much more towards a knowledge and service-based economy, which de-emphasizes manual work and physical strength, which of course men have more of.
True, but that's not why men have become disdained by women. Men have become disdained by women because basically women have joined the workforce, right? And so women that were previously dependent on men for a life and to even have children and to be able to support them now no longer need that. And so women don't need the beta side of hypergamy anymore. They only need the alpha side. And so all these girls are passing Chad around and then just paying for themselves, right? As opposed to, or they're doing a secondary version of this, which is, you know, becoming a single mom to Chad and then letting the government take care of her, or whatever. And many less women are getting married, right? And men are realizing this, waking up to this, and also walking away on top of this, which further exacerbates the problem. Again, the marriage rate right now in 2023 is like 6 out of 1,000, and it's actually going down even more. So they say that divorce is going down. Well, yeah, because marriage is going down. Marriage is going down hugely because, again, it's all downside risk for men, so why would they get married? And most women aren't interested in most men, so again, why would they get married?
I think all of these things have pushed women out of the domestic sphere and into a more masculine roles.
Indeed.
You know, it is good for GDP, to put it bluntly.
That's exactly right. It is good for GDP for the woman to work. It is good for the GDP for families to be destroyed, for women to be unhappy, for men to be unhappy and walking away, for children to grow up in single parent households. It's good for the GDP, but it's bad for everybody.
To have women participating in the workforce. And
Indeed.
When you have things like washing machines and central heating and microwaves and all these things which mean that the work of running a household just takes less time, it becomes more possible for women to do things like that. And when you can also delay childbearing through the pill and other contraception, women being more like men becomes possible and becomes actually economically productive. The problem is that there are all sorts of costs down the line from that. And actually,
exactly. That is exactly the problem. The problem is that there are costs down the line, which nobody wants to discuss, because discussing the costs of that down the line, what it does is people call you an M word or an A word, right? That's what it is.
Including economic costs down the line from that, which mean that we're dealing with some quite painful trade-offs.
Yeah. Economic cost down the line is that you make your whole population stupid. And by making your population stupid, you then have to take people from other cultures and import them, which changes your culture, right? And eventually destabilizes your entire civilization. Anyway, all right. On to the article by Rollo Tomasi. Male space. There's an interesting discussion that's been belabored in the manosphere for a while now, that of traditionally, quote-unquote, male spaces being infiltrated by women and or being redefined by feminized restructuring. The modern Western workplace is the easiest example of this, but whether it's the recent inclusion of women in the formerly all-male membership of Augusta Golf Club, or the lifting of the ban on women and accommodating the prevalent physical deficits being in combat roles in the military, the message ought to be clearer to RP men. The feminine imperative has a vested interest in inserting itself into every condition of male exclusivity. Whether this condition is an all-male club or cohort, gender-segregated team sports, for example, or a personal state that's typically attributed only to the masculine, characteristics, strength, rationality, decisiveness, risk-taking, even brashness or vulgarity, the feminine imperative encourages women to insert themselves and, by association, the feminine imperative itself, into masculine exclusivity. See Scout Willis's most recent activism to encourage female equality by going topless in public as an example of this female to male parity. In an equalist utopia, if men can do it, women should be able to as well. The first woman. This push into male space is rarely due to a true desire to belong to a traditionally all-male institution or condition, but women are encouraged to believe they'll make some dent in the universe simply by being the first to push past their quote-unquote gender barrier. It's not about making a true contribution to that male institution or endeavor, but rather the goal of being the first woman to do it too. For all of the misdirection of a hope for equalism, it's not about becoming an astronaut for a woman, but rather becoming the first woman astronaut, then moving on to being the first woman assigned to a combat role in the military, then the first woman to play at Augusta. If equalism were the real intent, we could expect the desire of the endeavor itself to supersede this, but the feminine imperative motivates women and socially demotivates men's resistance to the first goal, not the actual accomplishment or excellence in that accomplishment or endeavor. The trail being blazed is less important than being the first woman trailblazer. In fact, it can simply be the same trail men blazed centuries before and still be recognized as a significant accomplishment. The goal is to be a woman in a male space. The cover story is the same trope the feminine imperative and its social arm, womanism, always finds useful. The never-ending push towards gender equalism. The practice, however, reveals the push into male space serves two purposes: social control and male oversight. Social control is the easier of the two to grasp. Even when changing the rules of an all-male game to accommodate a lack of genuine female interest in a male endeavor, it fundamentally alters the nature of that game. The first woman allowed participation in that game is a novelty enough to extend the feminine imperative social control into that male space, i.e., nowadays women do it too. An easy example would be NASCAR's embracing a driver like Danica Patrick. It's not that she's an exceptional driver, and I can't vouch for her genuine passion, but the social control she represents is that she's the first woman to dubiously be taken seriously in the nominally all-male space of NASCAR drivers. The goal has been achieved. All that's left now is female oversight of this male space. Overseers in the locker room. The second purpose is the goal of female inclusion into male spaces is really a policing of the thought dynamics and attitudes of men in that space. When women are allowed to access the locker room, the dynamic of the locker room changes. The locker room can take many different shapes. The workplace environment, the sports team, the group of all-male coders, the primarily male scientific community, the boys club, the group of gamer nerds at the local game store, even strip clubs and the sanctuary you think your man cave is. The context of one of women inserting themselves into a male space in order to enforce the dictates of feminine social primacy. When the influence of feminine privacy is introduced into social settings, made up mainly by men and male interests, the dynamics and purpose of that group changes. The purpose becomes less about the endeavor itself and more about adherence to the feminine inclusionary aspect of that endeavor. It starts to become less about being the best or most passionate and more about being acceptable to the influence of the feminine imperative while attempting to maintain the former level of interest. Men unaccustomed to having women in their midst generally react in two ways. According to their proper feminized conditioning, they embrace the opportunity to impress these trailblazing women, hoping to be found worthy of intimacy, with the enthusiastic acceptance of and identification with the feminine overseer, or they become easy foils of an outmoded way of thinking that the new in-group happily labels them with. Once the feminine primary in-group dynamic is established, a feminine correct social frame follows. This feminine correction restructures the priorities of goals and validates any accomplishments in terms of how they reflect upon the feminine as a whole. Thus, any in-group success is perceived as a feminine success in a male space, while in-group failures or simple mediocrity is either dismissed entirely or blamed on out-group men's failure to comply with or the rejection of the feminine imperative's correct influence on the in-group. Bro culture. When I was writing The Apologist, I briefly delved into the topic of bro culture. It seems that a constantly self-reinventing womanism loves to attach culture to the end of anything it sees as threatening. Male culture of privilege, bro culture. Make no mistake, the concept of bro culture is an operative feminine social convention. It may be convenient to think of the stereotype of bro culture as a male creation, but this convention is the direct result of the feminine imperative's controlling need to insert itself into male spaces. There are other feminine social conventions with the same latent purpose, but the bro culture meme is really a dual-purpose shaming tactic intended to restrict and control traditional male bonding while also fostering infighting amongst in-group and out-group men once feminine influence has been established in a formerly all-male space. Okay, let's go back to this video here.
From what you just talked about. Let's start with economic trade-offs. So what are the economic trade-offs for having, I suppose, women in the workplace and less around children?
Because someone has to look after the children would be the first thing. So you have this
Indeed.
slightly strange artifact of the way that we measure GDP, where if you have if a mother goes to work and hires a nanny to do her role, what was her role while she's at work, that appears to be economic growth. Because you now have, in that unit, you have mother, father, nanny all employed, as opposed to just having father employed. It's a misleading way of calculating that, though, because
Right, because the money, if the money that girl makes has to be used for childcare, then it's like, if the money that woman has has to be used for childcare, then what was the point of her not just taking care of the child in the first place, is the idea.
is the work of the domestic work that was previously unpaid is still being done. It's exactly the same work. It's just being done by someone else and for a wage. And of course there's all sorts of sort of friction in that system that wouldn't be there otherwise, because you've got three rotating parts that need to.
There's more to this. Children that grow up in daycare or with a nanny grow up worse than children that are raised by their mother. So having a mother in the house, a stay-at-home mom, is actually better. The only problem is, in our current system, to be the single dad that works, the only working parent in the relationship, you have to make basically more than twice what the average person makes. In fact, you have to make more than twice, usually. So it's like only hyper successful men can live in a way that is optimal for children, which is insane if you think about it.
Locked together, unlike in the single earner household where you just have the one, and then you have specialization between mother and father.
Indeed.
And you have mother specializing in the domestic work. Instead, when you introduce the paid component, everything becomes much more complex, much more liable for collapse. So interestingly, it was Elizabeth Warren, of all people, who wrote a book some decades ago called The Two Income Trap, about the fact that
I've heard of that.
Yeah, when both parents are in paid employment, the household becomes dependent on both of them being in paid employment, and there's much less room for slack. Whereas what you would have had previously is women kind of dipping in and out of the workforce, particularly working class women, dipping in and out of the workforce when, say, children are a bit older or when fathers' earnings have suffered and they need.
Yeah, that's literally the case that I made before. So I have nothing against women working, but the problem is this. they are currently wasting their most prime fertility years on work when they should actually be using it to have children. Then they can go to university later and they can join the workforce later. That's what they used to do. That's what used to happen, right? But now they don't do that. Anyway, it's ridiculous.
A bit of extra money, and female labour participation becomes a sort of a variable that can change over time depending on economic circumstances. Whereas if all families are dependent on 2 full-time incomes, there's no room for slack. There's no source of other income if hard times come along. And what's more, you all end up competing with
each other.
The lump of labour fallacy, obviously, it's not quite true that you end up with wages halved by women entering the workforce, because women entering the workforce does grow the economy in all sorts of ways. But there are certain products, like housing, for instance. If you have a fixed supply of housing in, say, a good school district, and everyone is competing to buy that housing, and everyone is competing with 2 incomes rather than 1, you do end up in a situation, which I think we're in now, where in order to have a good standard of living, you have to have 2 incomes, unless you have one extraordinarily high earner.
Indeed. You can't have a person with an average income and have a good standard of living. It has to be a person with an exceptionally high income with nobody, or 2 average incomes. And actually, in 2023, it's more like 2 above average incomes, or you're done.
So is that a result of women going back to work, or going to work in the first?
Not going back, going in the first place.
Is that actually a direct result of that, or did the increase in housing prices come first?
There are other things contributing to housing prices, including, I mean, the thing that is most often spoken about in the political discourse on this is the lack of building, which clearly is a factor. It's a fact as well in somewhere like the UK, that you have this extreme concentration of high-earning jobs in London, and in other parts of the world you have this.
Oh, by the way, before I comment on this, anyway, let's look at the appearance of the 2 girls here. The girl on the right is actually older, but which girl is more attractive? Is the girl on the left with a ton of makeup, foundation, puffy lips, dyed hair, and kind of an entitled attitude? Is she more attractive, which is the girl on the left? Or is it the girl on the right, who's clearly much more traditionally feminine? She also has dyed hair, but much more understated, much more feminine, nothing done to the lips, not an excessive amount of makeup, and a much more calm, feminine demeanor. I mean, it speaks for itself, guys. Like, which are men more attracted to? I don't know about you, but I would choose the girl on the right every day. Like, it's just very obvious which one is more agreeable, more pleasant, more feminine, more cooperative. Very obvious. All right, let's go to the Reddit post here. This is from Relationship Advice, posted 11 hours ago. So my current partner, so both are 31, is being really pushy about how I handle my finances with my recent ex. By the way, red flag immediately. Current partner. They don't say girlfriend, they don't say boyfriend, they don't say husband, they don't say wife. They believe in egalitarian equalism. It's already a red flag from the top. So I, 31 male, was in a very long distance relationship that ended 8 months ago. We're currently in the process of sorting out our finances that we had together, like the house we bought, furniture, etc. Anyway, I've met this new person we'll call Jane. Jane and I have been dating for a couple months now. We live together in a rental. Wait, what? You've only been dating for a couple months and you already live together? Disaster. My ex and I had agreed to have a cooling off period, and we're going to start up the finances discussion first week of the new year. When Jane and I moved into our rental, we needed a lot of white goods, so she kept pushing me to go and pick the fridge and washing machine and TV and yada yada from my ex's house, since I own half of it. I told her about the arrangement we had, and she says that I'm choosing my ex over her. When I ask her to respect my boundaries and that it has nothing to do with her and it's my issue, she says that since we're now together, it's also her issue, and her feelings about how I should handle it should be taken into account. I think there's going to be a big fight about it with my current partner, and I'm dreading it all. My ex says she's going to pay me out and keep the house, but is struggling to get refinanced since she's recently started studying. But Jane keeps telling me to get it to sell so I can get what's owed to me. it keeps feeling like a money and material possession thing. I never say this, but I asked her how it's affecting her and why she feels like she needs to be so involved in the process. And her reply is that because we're now together, that is now her problem also. I do also note that being with someone that has a house with their ex can still be confronting, I guess. But how do I navigate the situation? The new girl that has convinced you somehow to live with her after like 2 months is using you for finances. She is trying to get you to sell because now that she lives with you, she can get you to be, what's it called? In a common law marriage. And once you're in a common law marriage and she divorces you, quote unquote, which she will, because she knows she can, she'll take half of that. She's trying to enrich you so that you're a fatted calf when she leaves you. That's what she's trying to do. Okay, let's look at the top comment. 365 upvotes. Anyway, I've met this new person we'll call Jane. I've been dating for a couple months and we live together in a rental. This right here is your problem. Not that she's pressuring you to get the damn fridge. You messed up. Can you get out of this living situation? Yeah, exactly. Okay, 1.1k upvotes. Let's see what they say. My friend, what are you doing? You were with someone for 8 years. That doesn't just leave your system in a month or two. You really need to give yourself a year or so before you get into something with another person. Never mind moving in with someone. You haven't even been able to be detached enough with each other to sort out finances. Do you really think you've worked through the emotional stuff too? I doubt it. What I foresee happening is a period of a few months from now where the reality sets in and you realize that you have in no way dealt with the breakup. Jane is very likely a rebound, whether you realize it or not. Also, she's absolutely out of line trying to push financial issues with your ex. But that's being fueled by her insecurity in this relationship because something inside her knows that you're not completely finished breaking up. What you really read right now is no relationship. You need your own space with no complications and you need to be on your own. I agree. Break it off with the new girl and relax. Just sleep around. You don't need to be in a long-term relationship where you're living with a girl within 2 months. Agreed. Alright guys, we're going to end the video there. If you're new to the channel, liking the content, hit that sub, hit all for notifications. If you'd like to support me, I do have a newly revamped Patreon. Go there and subscribe. It's patreon.com/theheliosblog. Again, it's patreon.com/theheliosblog. You could also go and drop me a donation like Tom M here. Shout outs to him. Link is in the description. Guys, thank you so much for listening, especially if you took the time to listen all the way to the end of the video. Really do appreciate it. You guys are wonderful. And I will see you next time.